Right then, guys, welcome back into the Spooky Shed, your go-to place for conversations around all things weird, scary, and of course spooky. Tonight with me, I've got Gina Black from She Haunts. So, Gina, welcome to the shed. How are we?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Yeah, right. So, pre-warned you earlier, so I always ask my guests to leave something in the shed with me. It can be anything, something you love, something you hate, a person, a place, a feeling, a thing. People have left advice. While some of it's been good advice, it's always I always think that's a bit boring. Like, I want something weird. So what have you got for me?
So, I would like to leave a haunted doll.
Oh, why do people keep giving me haunted dolls? They scare the shit out of me.
So, her name is Iris, and we think she's from around the early 90s, probably 90s ish. And so, I got her at a thrift store. And what's cool is, I brought her home, and my cat really was like fixated on getting into the room that she was in almost immediately after I got her. And he's never really been allowed in this room, but he's
Mm.
never really expressed any interest in getting in the room. And it's so crazy how much he tries to get in there now. And when he has gotten in, he kind of snuck in. He'll sleep right next to her, and I'll find him sleeping on the shelf next to the doll. And it's just the weirdest thing. I've brought her on investigations. We've gotten some EVP. We've gotten some devices that were set off around her. And I don't think she's evil or anything. I just think that there's something in and around her. And I think that she's got something to her. So that's what I'm going to leave today.
Fair enough. Fair enough. People are leaving far too many haunted dolls in here for my liking, but my rule is I have to take everything. So they scare the hell out of me. I don't know why, they just do.
I feel the same
They
way.
just look weird as well. Though I think that's the main thing. They just look creepy as hell.
Yeah, I kind of got fixated on haunted dolls, and I only have a couple, but
Mm.
I got them for research purposes, really. But I also find them pretty creepy.
Yeah, I do find it very interesting,
Hmm.
but also like not in my house. Yeah, just keep them somewhere else. But they're very interesting, but just not in my house. Yeah. So your Instagram, your bio says on there, I think it's author, blogger, explorer. So I know you do a lot of things. So do you just want to let anyone who doesn't know who you are what you do?
Absolutely. So I live in South Florida. I am a paranormal investigator. I started a paranormal team with a friend of mine, and we have been a team for about a year and a half now. And we do investigations all over South Florida. So, like, if you're familiar with Miami area, Fort Lauderdale, we're all around. And in addition to my paranormal research, I'm also a cemetery enthusiast, and I recently published a book about cemetery symbolism. And it is, basically just kind of a collection of all of my studies and my photography. And it was a real big passion project that I wrapped up in May of 2025. So it's actually up on Amazon. It's called Etched in Stone: Decoding Hidden Meanings in Cemeteries. And it's just been a real fun ride for me to publish my first book.
Nice. That's very interesting. So we're gonna have to go into that because I've never heard anybody ever describe themselves as a cemetery enthusiast. That's a new one.
Okay. Well, we're out
Like,
there. There's a group of us.
so what's so interesting, and what sort of hidden symbols then have you found?
So, when it comes to cemeteries, what I found interesting personally is the sculpture. And
Mm.
as someone who I went to college for an art degree, I'm very enamored with museums and sculpture. And when around the COVID times, when everybody was kind of stuck indoors, I went outside with my camera and I started taking pictures of cemeteries because they were quiet and they were usually, kind of a place where you wouldn't run into anybody. And I started really falling in love with cemetery sculpture. There's a lot of interesting stuff out there. And I started noticing more and more that there were certain symbols that kept popping up on headstones and mausoleums. And these are kind of what, launched my interest in finding out more and what was behind them. And turns out there's a hidden language of cemetery symbolism that was very popularized in the Victorian era. And there's a lot of hidden meaning in the art that you see in them. So I became very interested in this topic because it really wasn't something that I knew a whole lot about. So I took a lot of time, talking with people that work in cemeteries, taking tours, and just studying them. I would say, some of the most interesting ones, just, real quick, that I found were, symbols that other people kind of connected with would be the cemetery gate itself. The
Mm.
cemetery gate itself was made out of iron. And when you see these beautiful iron gates around the world, they have a hidden meaning. And that was to keep the spirits inside, because there was kind of an old superstition that ghosts and witches and all kinds of supernatural beings could not pass through iron. So if you see an old timey cemetery, it's usually surrounded by an iron gate. Sometimes plots themselves are also surrounded by iron gates or iron fences. And that was why, because people wanted to leave the spirits in the cemetery. So that's a popular one. And another quick one that's kind of fun is cemetery direction as far as the graves are. And typically, if you see most cemeteries out there, you're going to see graves facing the east, because many Christians believed that that was the direction of Christ, because Christ, the Son of God is Jesus, and the sun rises in the east. So all the cemeteries, would have their graves facing the east so that they would see the rise of the sun. And that was symbolic to Christians. However, if you see a west facing grave, that was either somebody who was excommunicated from the church, or maybe somebody who was suspected of being a witch, or it could just be somebody that turned their back to the church, somebody who, decided to leave the church. So, those are some common ones that I found interesting that I think some other people might find some connections to that you can kind of see at most properties.
Yeah, no, that is definitely interesting and something that I wouldn't have even thought about. So I'm definitely gonna have to look more into stuff like that. That's interesting. I like that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Funny enough, you mentioned cemeteries because I'm obsessed with Lego and I've been looking for like spooky Halloween sort of Lego things, and then I found this, which is supposed to be like a little gravestone.
Oh, that's cool. And it lights up? Oh, I love
Yeah.
that. That's so
So
fun.
coincidence.
That's super
Yeah.
cool. I didn't know they made them that light up.
Well, it's not real Lego.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's like fake. It's fake Lego, but people who are really into Lego don't like the word fake Lego because it's disrespectful. Apparently, don't
Mhm.
ask. But yeah, yeah. So I usually always start by asking people where their interest into the paranormal and everything comes from, just because it's usually a very different answer to my own.
Well, I would say I've just always been interested in scary stories growing up as a kid. I lived in upstate New York, which, you know, my family had a home that had a fireplace in it. We would have very cold winters, and it was kind of tradition to kind of sit around the fire, tell ghost stories, and even sometimes on long car rides, my parents
Mm,
would tell ghost stories. So that was really my interest, being more apparent to me at that point. But when I moved to Florida when I was like a preteen, and my parents bought a house, which wasn't super old, but the house came with a ghost. And everybody in my house, experienced it, all of my family members. Some people have actually seen it. I've heard things. I've had experiences, but I've never seen a ghost with my own eyes. But that really kind of drove me to research more about the paranormal, because it was happening in my house. It was happening where I lived. I just, it really piqued my interest.
So I learned a couple of days ago that over there in the US that you can get sued if you don't report that a house is haunted when you sell it, which to me is crazy.
Well, it's actually interesting because not every state in the United States has that law, but there are some states that do. And I think what's the most popular law when it comes to real estate is you have to report deaths in the home, like a
Mm,
murder or something like that. A real estate agent has to report that to the buyer in many states, but
mm,
not every state.
yeah.
And yeah, there's certain things that need to be reported to the buyer, but it doesn't happen all the time.
Mm.
The way that they get around it is there's a certain period of time. So let's say if a murder happened in the early 1900s and you buy the house in 2025, they don't necessarily have to tell you that. They have a certain amount of years that as long as if it happened in the last 10 years, we have to tell you. So it's
Mm.
real shady. And yeah, some people really, if you're buying an older house, it's probably a good idea to do a little research on it, but not everybody believes in spirits until they're confronted with a spirit in their house.
But that's what I mean. That's what I love about that because, like, reporting murders in a house when you're selling it makes
Yeah.
complete and utter sense to me. Because whilst I probably would, like, have second thoughts about living in a murder house.
Yeah.
But like, because you can prove that. But the whole thing is like, to me, like, there's no 100% clear-cut evidence if the house can be haunted. So I'd just love to see how that would go down in court. Do you know what
There's
I
been
mean?
some really crazy court cases over the years. I listen to a lot of true crime podcasts and spooky
Mm,
podcasts, and from listening to so many of those, I've learned about all kinds of crazy court cases where, the one of the famous ones, The Devil Made Me Do It,
yeah.
the Warrens, the trial where a person claimed that after in the act of murdering someone, it was because they were possessed by the devil. I mean, there's been so many crazy court cases, but I mean, I've heard of some coming out of the UK too. So I guess, even though we're across the pond, we do share some of that spooky court happenings.
Yeah, true. Not much of a thing over here though, unfortunately.
Mhm.
Mm, it's a shame. Um, so when you moved into this house, then obviously it came with its own ghost. What sort of things were you experiencing? What sort of things were happening?
So, the most profound thing that ever happened was a time where I was actually about 18 years old. I was getting ready to go to college. I was in my last couple weeks of high school and I was getting ready for the day, the next day, and I was preparing all my clothing and everything. I had all these things set up to get ready the next morning. I'm getting in the restroom, washing my face, brushing my teeth, and I hear this loud sound, this banging sound. So I come out of the bathroom to hear what it was. My dad comes running around the corner. He's looking to see what it was. Everybody in the house was sleeping otherwise. And I had a brand new pair of sneakers, and the sneaker was on the floor, and one of the laces was shredded. Now, we're looking around, we're like, what was the sound? So we turned on the lights and we see two footprints from the shoe on the wall. Okay, it's a white wall. Now, the footprints, if I were to stand up, at my full height, I'm about 5'9". And if I were to
Mm,
reach my arm up as high as I could and hit the shoe against the wall twice, it was about that height. And you can see a clear tread pattern from the bottom of the shoe. Now, I had a cat and the cat was freaked out. So our first thought was, we're trying to investigate what happened. Our first thought was maybe the cat did it. So we're
how
looking
big is your
around,
cat?
just a regular sized cat. So we're thinking, we're like, maybe he got the laces caught in his teeth or something, and that's why they're shredded. It just didn't make any sense.
Yeah,
And but then we
yeah.
thought maybe if he got the laces caught in his teeth and he was trying to get it off of his teeth, maybe he hit the shoe. But he's a little small cat. It wouldn't have been able to be, 6 feet up on the wall. And it was
Mm,
perfectly like as if someone's pressed the bottom of the shoe into the wall. So it was really bizarre. And the thing is, I've told this story to some people and they're like, "Oh, your dad probably did it." And I said, "You don't know my dad. My dad is a very, very clean person. He really took care of his home. He would follow us around with a dustpan if we were eating a cookie and we got crumbs on the floor. I mean, this man was very, very particular about his home. He never would have done that because if there was a scratch on his wall, we would never hear the end of it. You know what I mean? So I
yeah.
know he wasn't trying to scare me, and it just was an unexplainable thing. But in addition to that, there were also situations where there was a guest room in the house and people that stayed over would have experiences in that back room. Lights would get turned on, all kinds of things along those lines. But recently, because my parents still live in the house, recently my mom reported she was in her bath. So she was taking a bath. She has a very large bathroom. And on the opposite side of the bathroom, probably about maybe 12 feet away from where the bath was, a perfume bottle was thrown from one side of the bathroom to the other. And she was in the tub. She's like, there's no way. So something's in that house. And even though it's not always active, sometimes, something gets
Mm,
moved, something gets thrown, something gets pissed off about something, and then it wants you to know.
yeah.
So we don't know what it is, but it's definitely there.
Yeah, that's definitely weird. And for a minute there, I did think you had like a pet lion or something when you thought it was the cat. But I can see what you mean. But yeah, like for things being thrown around, because that's one that always interests me, and like lights and stuff. Because I'm very so I have a little catchphrase. So I say now that I believe in things, but I don't know what I believe in because there's still a part of me that's skeptical on some things. So with like lights and stuff, obviously the easiest thing to say is, "Oh, it's dodgy wiring or something," which
Mhm.
could very well be that, but it could also be something else. I can admit it could be both now.
Yeah, well, the thing about that house is it was a fairly new house,
Mm,
and they're really outside of a few isolated times of lights getting turned on, it wasn't something that happened all the time.
yeah,
And it's just an interesting thing. So I agree with you too. That's why I always tried to
mm,
find a reason what could have caused
yeah.
the hauntings, but We've just never
Yeah.
been able to find a logical reason.
Yeah, but it's like when you say there with the perfume bottle, like they're the sort of things that really intrigue me because there is no way of explaining that. Like, I think if something just falls off a shelf, like
Right.
I don't know, like there might be a much more easier way of explaining that. But if something is like physically, like even is like pushed, thrown, like
Yeah.
feet across a room, like how
Yeah.
are you explaining that it's not something that you can't see?
I mean, it's definitely not
Mm,
explainable, and I asked her to show me where the bottle, how
mm,
far it was from the wall,
yeah,
and she indicated it went almost across the whole bathroom, and the bathroom's I don't know the exact measurements, but it's pretty big. It's
mm,
got a huge bath, and then there's 2 sinks, and then there's a shower and a toilet off to the side. It's a very large master bathroom. So, I'm guessing maybe 12 feet, 10, 12
yeah,
feet. The perfume bottle was on one wall, and it landed almost on the opposite side, right next to
mm,
the bathtub. And it wasn't thrown into the bath, thankfully, because it did shatter. But she had no explanation. She was home by herself. There wasn't anybody else around. So it's just, it's kind of scary. But she said, hey, maybe they were just trying to get my attention. But they live with it, and their attitude about it is, well, we try not to bother them, and we hope that they don't bother us. And once in a while something happens, and they just kind of okay. So they don't really get scared anymore.
I was gonna say, 'cause I think like a lot of people would probably be like, right, nope, that's it, we're moving.
Yeah. Well,
Mm,
I've been over there a few times, with my paranormal equipment, and I've caught electric voice phenomena, EVP, on my
mm,
recorder. I've also captured some interesting temperature changes right around certain areas. If you're in a room and you're at a constant, temperature, and all of a sudden it drops 10 degrees and it goes back to
mm,
normal, things like that. I've picked up some activity like EMF activity around certain areas of the guest bedroom that there's no electronics or anything that would emit EMF. So it's kind of an interesting thing that, I'm lucky enough that I can go over there really whenever I want. They're not that far from me where I live now, and I could, investigate. But, they sort of feel that who's ever there is, they're letting them live there and they don't want to bother them too much.
mm. Yeah, I've never really like I've used paranormal equipment and stuff before, but I've never used anything to like measure temperatures and stuff. But I didn't realize that like temperature drops that people report can be as big as like you say, like they're like 10 degrees. That seems crazy.
Yeah, there's a tool that I use that is pretty popular with paranormal investigators, and it's called a Melmeter. And what's
Mm,
interesting about the Melmeter, there are multiple types of Melmeters, but the one that I have measures both electromagnetic field changes, EMF, and it also measures temperature. So
mm,
if you experience a spike in EMF and a drop in temperature at the same time, that's more compelling than just a temperature drop or just an EMF spike. You're getting two different types of measurable activity. So I like
mm,
to use that, and it's very accurate. It'll tell you the room is, in Fahrenheit 75.51. It'll tell you the exact temperature. So it's
yeah.
very sensitive, and when you're dealing with these kinds of things, you want to know, hey, I feel, a coldness around my arm, and then you put the millimeter over and you can say, yeah, it's a 10-degree difference next to your arm versus on next to the other arm, so something might be around you. And then you can
Mm,
start asking questions with your recorder. It's kind of almost as if our bodies are an antenna, and we're walking into a room that may be haunted, and we say, okay, I feel something here. All right,
mm,
let's bring out the other tools and let's see what we can investigate with. So it's a good idea, when you're investigating, to really be aware of those things and try to, notice as much as you can, because those little tiny things might add up to something more.
mm. No pun intended, but that is quite cool. But I'd never thought of that before because like I've experienced like things like say like the example you gave there where like one arm will feel colder than the other. I'd never like I said, just I didn't think it would be that much of a difference between like 10 degrees and stuff. Just again, I was like being a bit skeptical with things. You're like, oh, it's like just a draft or something. But obviously, like I say, if it's just a draft, it's not going to change it by like ten
Well,
degrees. That
yeah, and that's the thing. When you're investigating, you always want to look for those
mm,
answers first. You want to say, is there an air conditioning vent? Is
mm,
there an open door? Is there an open window? You always want to look for those things so that you can point to them and say, okay, that's a false positive. That's debunked.
mm,
And it's just part of, the investigation, is trying to always find the explanational, answer first, a logical explanation. And then if you can't find one, well, then you could say, well, that might be paranormal. And there's always a possibility that it could be debunked later. I think one of the interesting things that happened to me recently was my paranormal team met up with some friends on the other side of the state on the west coast of Florida and another paranormal team, and we were investigating an old opera theater. So if you can picture an old opera theater, there I would say many of them have these beautiful red curtains, right? Where the performers would stand behind the curtain would open up, and then they would perform. So this particular location had one of those very old theater curtains. So before we started investigating, of course, we got to take some selfies. We're like, okay, everybody get together in front of the curtains. Let's take some pictures. So I have an iPhone, and one of the features on an iPhone is called a live photo. Are you familiar
Yeah.
with what that is?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so a live photo basically is like a mini video. And what's
Mm.
cool about a live photo when you're taking a group picture is if like one person has their eye closed or something, you can kind of scroll to another area of the shot so you can find a picture where nobody has their eyes closed. So we like to take live photos a lot. But now when you go through a live photo, you can speed it up and slow it down and you can look at it almost like a mini movie. It's a couple seconds long. And I'm looking at these live photos and I'm seeing the curtain moving behind us. And I was under the impression that there was no air conditioning on when we arrived because we told them, when we got there and then they turned it on. So at that point in the night, there was no air conditioning on. And I said to everybody, hey guys, I think there might be something happening on the stage while we were taking this photo. And I showed all the investigators, and somebody said, you know what? There was actually a fan on the floor. So that was what was causing that. And, we debunked it. So we said, okay, it's not paranormal. There was an explanation for it. But if
Yeah.
I didn't ask those questions to everybody in the room, and it was really just that one person that remembered that, we might have said, hey, this is a haunted piece of evidence, and it really wasn't. So,
Yeah.
it happens.
Yeah, it's why I mean, I often say this to people, and sometimes I get a funny look, sometimes others agree with me, but I really don't like EMF detectors.
Hmm.
I think there's I think there's too many other things that can set them off, like iPhones. Literally, iPhones set
Yeah.
them off. Like you put the next to an iPhone and it goes ballistic.
Yeah, you
So,
gotta turn the iPhone if you're using a phone, you have to turn it on airplane mode,
mm,
and then it won't affect an EMF reader, but you're right, any electronics will, and
yeah,
even other ghost hunting equipment will
mm,
set it off, so it's one of those items that it's best used in a place where there's no electricity running, so you don't wanna if you're in a dark, haunted house and there's no electricity on, and there's no phones that are off airplane mode and something happens, then maybe it might be paranormal. With an EMF reader, what's cool is if you're on an investigation and you put down an EMF reader, it's got little lights on it usually. You can say, "Hey, if there's anyone in the room, can you go over and touch that little black box?" And you can
mm,
you can see the lights move. Sometimes you'll get intelligent responses and you'll see the lights move and you'll say, "Oh, that was great. Can you do it again?" And then you'll see the lights move again.
mm.
So, I agree with you. There is certainly other equipment that might be better calibrated to and more accurate, but in certain environments, an EMF reader can be really good.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there, like you say, for if like say if you're in like an empty room and you're like using it to sort of like ask questions like that, I suppose it probably does probably well it is good for that. But I don't know. There's just yeah, I don't know. There's just, my other weird little problem I have with them, like they're really cheap. So like to me, like they can't be that good if they're that if you can buy them that cheaply.
Yeah,
But
no, I
I don't
I
know.
agree with you. I do. I have an
Yeah,
EMF reader that was over $100, and I have one that's, $25.
yeah.
So they certainly can be cheap. Yeah.
Mm, crazy. You mentioned theaters there because I had this conversation last night. It's something that's always fascinated me. Like, why are so many theaters haunted? I mean, I'm not expecting you to give me an answer to that, but do you know what I mean? Like, I always say, like, every theater you go
Yeah.
to, there's always a ghost story with it. It
Yes,
always
and you
seems
know
odd
what?
to me.
It's true, and one thing that I found out I'm not a theater person in the
Mm,
sense that, like, I grew up in the theater or I ever was in acting or anything like that, but in my line of work as a paranormal investigator, I have investigated probably half a dozen theaters, and my answer to that is that I think, and this is just my opinion, I think that people that are in the theater, whether they're singers or they're musicians or they're actors or they're directors, any of those people, if you've ever met someone that does that, they're very passionate about what they do. They love what they do. They put all of their heart and their soul into their performances. And quite literally, it's dramatic. It's a
mm,
dramatic job. And I think that the energy that you put into your job, the heart and the soul and all of that you put into it, sometimes that sticks around. And maybe you might get some residual energy that was just a byproduct of all of these creative people coming together and putting their creative energy forward. Also, you have these people that are very dramatic, actors and actresses and musicians. And maybe the theater was the place that they love the most in their life. And maybe they choose to stick around, whether they lost their life in the theater or not. Sometimes there are situations where theaters believe that actors or actresses come back
Mm.
because they cared about it. But I've also found that maybe it's just a space that people just cared about in general. Because I'm actually investigated a theater in Miami recently. I'm actually going back with my team in a couple weeks, and we were invited by the theater to come in. It's a historic theater, and according to records, no one's ever passed away there. There was all kinds of things that happened there. There was a fire, there was a hurricane, there was all this devastation over the years, and it was always rebuilt, but no one ever died on the record. They don't have
Yeah.
any record of it. But however, it's very, very haunted. And they're just kind of scratching their head saying, we don't know why it's haunted, but maybe the only theory is if it's not an actor or an actress, maybe it's just a theater goer. Maybe it's somebody who just loved going to that theater every day or every weekend and it was their thing that they love to do. So there's just so many reasons which can make it haunted, but I agree with you. Whenever you hear of a theater, an opera theater or music theater, a movie theater, they're always haunted. And
Mm.
one thing I found out, which I didn't know this, I don't know if you knew this, but there's something called a ghost light. Have you ever heard of this?
Yes.
A ghost light. And for anybody who doesn't know what a ghost light is, there's a special light that's left on in the theater at night when everybody goes home, and they leave it on for the ghosts so
Mm.
that if there are any ghosts, they can enjoy the stage to
Yeah.
themselves. It's like a
Mm.
offering for good luck.
Yeah. I'm really glad you said that because now I sort of feel like I have some sort of idea of what I'm talking about because that's basically the answer that I gave to the same question. Like obviously people who are into the theatre are very into it. So yeah, but I suppose I mean it makes sense because
Mm.
I mean if that's what your real passion is, then I suppose it's where you're going to want to stay, isn't it? When you go to wherever we go afterwards.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's also with any type of location,
Mm.
I think one of the most famous, have you ever heard of the Stanley Hotel, which was
Yeah.
inspired the movie The Shining? It's a
Yeah.
location a lot of people know all around the world, and I investigated a few years ago, and I asked one of the people that worked there because I took a little tour, they show you around all the spaces, and I said, "So why do you guys think it's haunted?" And they said, "We don't really know because as far as we know, there really haven't been any deaths on the property." That
Mm.
and their guess is, "Hey, this was a beautiful hotel and people enjoyed it for so long that maybe it was a place that everybody was very fond of that vacation there and they decided when they passed, hey, I'm going to go back to that vacation. I'm going to go back to the place where I was really happy." And that's the hotel's theory that's their staff.
Yeah.
So I think it could be really anything like that.
Yeah, like I say, I mean, it makes sense to me. Well, to me, it does, anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll go with that. So you mentioned then the Stanley Hotel that you've been there. What are some of the other locations that you've investigated, and well, give us like your favourites.
Okay. So the Stanley Hotel was interesting.
Mm.
I did have some paranormal activity in my hotel room, but not a lot. I would say it was probably one of the least active places I've investigated. I also investigated, this is a popular one a lot of people know of, the Lizzie Borden house. And that was a famous true crime story that of an unsolved murder. Nobody knows who really killed Andrew Borden and his wife, Abby Borden. And a lot of people think it was Lizzie. A lot of people don't think it was Lizzie. So, that's a very haunted location. And recently, over this summer, I investigated the Penhurst State School and Hospital, which, if you've ever watched any ghost shows, it's been on just about every one. It
Mm.
was a school for people that were perhaps had mental handicaps or
Mm.
physical handicaps, and people in the early 1900s, late 1800s, they were just kind of taking their family members and putting them in this school, and whether they needed help or not, they were sent to there and they were basically left there. And the conditions over time were very, very bad. There were children, there were adults, and these people were just treated horribly. There was a documentary actually done in the 60s that kind of blew the lid off of the treatment for these hospitals and all around the United States. And from that video, so many people saw how horrible it was. And from that video, it kind of brought about some change in the United States on how people are treated kind of in that kind of environment. As far as the location goes, it's been on just about every ghost hunting show. it's very famously haunted. There's so many different buildings on the property. I did an investigation with my friend Ashley, and we investigated quite a few different buildings, and it was very, very cool. I'd say the most memorable spot in our investigation was in a basement of what was called the Devon building. And in the basement was where they had the playrooms for the kids. There was one room that was called Candyland, and it had like all these creepy like carousels and like festival kind of stuff painted on the walls and candy lollipops and things like that, but just on a creepy basement wall.
Mm.
And then there was another room that had a slide in it, and just big open room in the basement, puddles and no windows. And it was just very dank and dark. And we experienced a lot of activity down there. I think that a lot of the spirits that inhabit that place probably don't know where else to go. I don't think they're
Mm.
necessarily stuck. I just think that they never, they didn't really have a home in life and they kind of just stay where they are. Very, very haunted. I also, another kind of interesting spot that I've done is the old St. Augustine jail, and it was one of the first jails in Florida, and it's in Florida's oldest city, one of the oldest cities in the United States is St. Augustine. It was founded by the Spanish and the Fids, so it was around even before the colonists and all that stuff. So
Yeah.
that city is very haunted, and I that was one of my first investigations. I did the jail there. So I've done a few spots. I like to travel around the United States, but I also, when I go abroad, I like to investigate as well. So I've done some around the UK. I've done some investigating in Japan. And, I want to continue as I travel to tackle more and more paranormal locations.
Nice. Well, we'll definitely have to talk about where you've been over here next then. But you made a good point there because it's what I was thinking because obviously what we were just talking about with like ghost spirits, obviously staying like within the theater and stuff. Like you hear about like asylums and stuff, and it's always made me wonder like why are they always like so haunted? But I think you made a good point there of the fact that they don't have anywhere else to go, which is really sad when you think about it. I mean, it's
Yeah.
sad anyway what happened in those sort of places, but then the fact that it appears that they don't even get any sort of relief afterwards, that they're still stuck there afterwards. It's really fucking horrible to think about.
It is. And I think that, as an investigator, I do not claim to have any sort of powers to
Mm.
like pass somebody on, I can't say, "Oh, you can go to the light," I can't do that. I'm just
Mm.
an investigator. I just want to learn, what's going on with the paranormal? What can we learn from it? What's hiding behind the veil? So when I go to these locations, I think the best way to approach it is to be as kind as you can, because these people were people and they lived there and they had experiences there and they weren't always good. So, and they weren't always treated with respect. So, if you go into that kind of place and you go in there with respect and you treat it, as you would people in front of you,
Yeah.
living people, then you're going to get great results. And the opposite end of it is, there are some investigators that have made careers on the fact that they're very aggressive and they come in and they antagonize spirits. I don't think you're here. Punch me in the face if you're actually here.
Yeah.
There are some TV shows, popular TV shows, where they've made careers on that kind of ghost hunting.
Mm.
But I think the kindness avenue is, if you want to think that that's cheesy, that's fine. I find that it really works for me. I find that going into a location and just being respectful is going to get me more results
Mm.
and every single time. And that's just my opinion. But yes, in those kinds of places, especially at Pennhurst State School, some of my interactions were with people that I think that they were treated horribly. I put a spirit box session up on my page, and my friend and I were asking some questions, and we heard a name, and we said, what's your name? We heard a name, and then we said, how come you stay here? And someone else came through and said he's disabled, which
Mm.
is kind of crazy because there were a lot of people that were disabled there. And
Yeah. Yeah.
then we were talking and talking and we weren't getting any responses, but we were, just being nice and polite. And then we heard a man say, I love them. So,
Mm.
a spirit box, if you've ever gotten into that, that's one of those ghost equipment where sometimes you're hearing nonsense
Yeah.
and sometimes you're hearing very specific responses to your questions.
Mm.
In this particular case, because we were in such a remote area, a spirit box is basically white noise and it
Yeah. Yeah.
uses radio stations to sift through white noise. There was no radio stations because we were so off the grid that we weren't even getting any radio stations. It was just static. So there was
Mhm.
no extra words. And everything that came through that box was specific to that place. It was really interesting, and for me, I will never forget that. I will never forget that investigation, being able to have a conversation with possible spirits that were, still there from a hospital that's been closed for many, many years. So it was a very eye-opening experience for me.
Yeah, I can imagine it. The spirit boxes definitely interest me because I've heard of so many like compelling stories that people have told me through using them. But then obviously because they use radio waves and obviously they can pick up daft little bits of actual radio signal and stuff, it can be a little bit like it would for me if I was actually using one. I'd almost need like at least like I don't know I don't know I'd need a good few words, almost like half sentences for me to believe it. If it was just like one or two word answers, I might struggle. But one story that someone told me that was really interesting. They were at a museum not far from where I live here in the UK. Obviously, it was all stuff to do with like World War II and stuff, and they were using the spirit box, and they got German voices coming through. Yeah,
Oh,
and obviously
that's
that ain't gonna be on any
creepy.
radio station here, so
Right.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
weird. Yeah, that
that's
was
very
definitely
weird.
interesting.
But really, with a spirit box, and because I get questions about it all the time, there are different kinds of spirit boxes. There's different ways you can set up a spirit box, and they're going to give you a lot of gibberish. But it's those kind of investigations where something like that either makes, a lot of sense
Mhm,
based on the location. In that case, they're speaking German, and you're not going to be picking up German radio stations there. Or if the words that are coming through are very specific to the questions that are being asked, down
mhm,
to the location, down to names of people that live there, things like that.
mhm.
Because you're not going to just hear that on a radio station. They can be very compelling, but there are a lot of, I think people get excited because you think you got evidence and then you're like, "Oh, well, it could have just been a radio station," you know? So it's one of those tools that you have to, just like the EMF reader, it depends on the environment and a lot of other factors.
Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned that you've done some investigating here in the UK. So
Yeah.
where have you been?
So I was not last summer, but the summer before last, my husband and I did we did an England kind of road trip, and we started off in London. We drove
Worst
to
place
not
ever.
I'm not gonna say it's the worst place ever, but I will tell you that everybody lied to me as far as how much time I needed in London, because I
I'm
will say
from
this. You're from there?
No, I'm from the north, so I don't like London.
Okay. Well, I was under the impression I needed a ton of time in London, and I really didn't. But
No.
that's here nor there. We
Mm,
started in London. We drove to Nottingham. We drove to the Cotswolds. We drove to Bristol, and then we drove to what is it called? Stonehenge, and then back to London. And one point in there, we actually flew to Paris for a day and flew back. And I did catacombs. When I was in London, we did quite a few different haunted places, and one of them was the old operating theater, which was very cool. And we were there right when they were closing, so we were actually the last people that they let in. There wasn't that many people inside, and one of the employees let me lay down on the operating table, which was super cool. And so we got to investigate a little bit, kind of explore. But the investigation that was really interesting, I think that was more fruitful, was when we were in Nottingham, we stayed in a little town called Castle Donington. This There was a manor called Donington Manor, and it was, a mansion converted to a hotel, and it was from the late 1700s, maybe 1796, 1790, something like that. And when we arrived, there was only one other family staying in the hotel, because we were there in summer, and I guess not a lot of people stay there during the summer. It's not their season. So when I arrived, I asked the gentleman who was working at the front desk. I said, "Hey, I introduced myself. I said I'm a paranormal investigator. Would it be okay at night? Can I walk around down here and, investigate the rooms?" He said, "Absolutely fine. Just, don't make any noise. You can go anywhere downstairs you want." And while I was down there, I had a lot of I felt like somebody was over my shoulder, and I would kind of turn around and thinking that it was the guy working there, but he was still in the back office. There's nobody around. At one point, I was standing in one of the ballrooms, and I was using my one of my EMF readers. I'm just standing still, and I heard creaking of floorboards as if there was footsteps in the
mhm.
room. Nobody. I turned on my flashlight. Nobody there. I went up to my room at some point just to investigate a little bit, and in my room, I got a really, really scary voice on my recorder, which my husband loved that. He loves it. He's not into paranormal, so he's like, okay, do whatever you want to do. But I was using the recorder and I got a scream into the recorder and it sounded like somebody told me to F off, like,
Mm.
over the recorder. And it was very clear. It was like yelling into the recorder. So that was interesting.
Also very
And
British.
yeah, yeah. F off. And then I had some of my equipment in my room because the room that we had was huge. It was like this huge bedroom with a fireplace. It had a balcony that went out. I mean, it was a large room. And closer to the fireplace on the mantle, I had set up some devices that would light up if anything came close to it, motion sensors, other things. And at one point, everything kind of lit up. And I said, oh, I'm going to walk over there. I'm going to, see what that was. And I step up to walk over towards the fireplace, and my other equipment back where I was sitting started going off, like something was messing with me. So it was pretty cool. So that was Castle Donington, and I did the cemeteries. I did in London. I did some of the Marvelous Seven, if you're familiar with that. I did Highgate and I did Brompton. And when I was in Highgate, are you familiar with the story of the Highgate vampire?
No, I don't think so, weirdly. I don't know. I don't think so. I feel like I should do because I bloody love vampires.
Okay, well, I'll have to send you some stuff. So,
Mm.
long story really short, long story very short, but in the late 1960s, there was a vampire panic in London and it just got really ugly. And what started it was there was some vandalism in the cemetery the day after Halloween it was found. So, obviously,
Mm.
you and I as adults put our heads together and say it was probably kids messing around in the cemetery on Halloween, right? That's who's gonna cause vandalism in a cemetery on Halloween, and you find it the next morning.
Or
Well,
zombies.
or zombies, I guess. So all these people started freaking out because they said, "Well, somebody's in there vandalizing." So this
Yeah.
local ghost hunting group goes into the cemetery and they say, "Oh, it wasn't children, it was a vampire. We could prove it. We've seen it." And all these two guys, they go and they give all these press conferences. They're talking to all the papers. They're going on talk shows. They're going on the radio. And they basically whipped up this panic that there was a vampire in Highgate Cemetery. And it got to the point where people were breaking into the cemetery at night and they were digging up bodies and they were staking them and leaving them out, or they would take them out of their graves and burn them. There were children that found a burned up, probably very old corpse. There was one point where there was a riot of people that formed outside the gates and the police had to be called. There were people climbing over the gates because they were so scared that there was a vampire. But then kind of the ending of this whole situation, the ghost hunters that incited these riots were inside a enclosed area known as the catacombs, the Highgate catacombs, which is like a vault of mausoleums. And what they did was they got into this place, they started ripping all the coffins out of the wall and staking all of the people inside. But when they got caught, there was, everybody, they put a stop to it. Thankfully, the police kind of, ended this whole situation around that time. But now, if you go there, there is still remnants of graves that were upset by this. There were still, if you go into the catacombs, there's a special tour that you can take. It's like once a day on certain days, and you can go in and you can see it. You see all of the broken walls where the mausoleums were broken and the caskets were taken out of the wall. You can still see all the open caskets. So when I was down there on this tour, they give you a little insider background and then they say, okay, you could walk around. So while I was walking around, I was using my recorder, I was using my equipment in there. And it was just while I didn't get a lot of activity, it was so eerie. And one of the eeriest, most uncomfortable places I can say I've ever been was in the Highgate catacombs,
Mm.
after that, the vampire panic. It just, and really the best way I could describe it is you feel like there's somebody around you, you feel like there's somebody watching you, and that feeling that you have in your gut to just turn around and look behind you is just the whole time. You feel like you're not welcome. And the only thing I can think of is if there are spirits down there, they're probably so pissed off from what happened to their final resting place that they really don't like those tours. They probably don't want people down there.
Yeah,
And
probably.
but the thing is about the cemetery is they have to do these tours because there's nobody paying to keep this place up. It's just
Mhm.
kept up by volunteers and the tours. So if you take a tour, all of your money goes towards the landscaping and keeping up the property. So it's actually a really good thing. All the people that work there are volunteers. I got to talking to one of them and she told me a million stories, super nice lady. If you ever go, you got to take the tour. But, you know, it is one of those things. It was a horrific situation and it scarred the location.
Yeah, yeah. I love stories like that from however many years ago because it makes me wonder, like, how have we managed to get to where we are now when people used to react like that?
I mean, this was like the 60s and the 70s. It was the late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah,
That's
I know.
wild.
It's just brilliant, though, isn't it? It's just like, I mean, I know people are stupid, but like, come on.
I guess. I mean, really, it goes to show you that if something is printed in the paper and the media comes out and they say something
Hmm.
is true, anybody's going to believe it. And that's kind I
Yeah,
mean, I guess it's not that far off from what we have in the news today. You know,
yeah,
if
true.
somebody just spins a crazy story and it's not fact checked, then everybody starts believing it. It's the
Mm.
same exact thing, the literal same thing, and everybody was freaked out. I mean, they really thought there were vampires. So, I mean, it's crazy, but yeah, it happened in our not too long ago.
I will say it's a real crime that you didn't go any further north than Nottingham, like, but
I
I'll let
wanted
I'll let you know.
to. I didn't have that much time. I actually so when I come back, I really would like to go further up north, kind of drive through North England. I want to do Scotland. I really want to do Edinburgh. That's kind of, every spooky girl's, destination of choice.
Yeah,
So I really want to go back. But the reason why I like the UK so much is, you have these beautiful, beautiful old churches, churchyards, and you have just the architecture is just incredible. You have these very old buildings that are kept up, and you have, people care about them. There's beautiful landscaping, gardens. I went into, several cathedrals. One of my favorites was when I was in Bristol, which Bristol, by the way, was incredible. And I would 100% go back and spend more time in Bristol, way less time in London. Bristol was super cool. And just being in these old churches and you're walking on the floor and you're walking over gravestones because the church is built on top of gravestones. It was just the coolest thing.
yeah.
But I love the architecture. I actually have a friend who is from England, and what his job is he's like a stone mason type of guy, but he specializes in restoring castles and churches. So what he
Mm,
does is if something breaks or is starting to crumble on one of these old buildings, they can't just like put a new piece of concrete up there and just slap it on. They have to have an artisan go up there and handcraft, and fix the sections that are breaking. So like, the flying buttresses and things like that, if they're starting to give way, he's called in and his team is called in to reconstruct these, historic sites. It's the coolest thing. It's probably the coolest job ever, but I think that's so fun. But I really would like to go back, and the weather there was so much nicer than most places I travel in the summer. It was very cool, and I don't mind the rain. I don't mind the clouds because as you can see from the color of my skin, I don't like the sun. So, I was all for it, and I wanna go back. So, I'll let you know if I come back.
yeah, do. Well, speaking of vampires and stuff, then I'm surmising you're obviously familiar with Dracula,
Yes.
so you know about Whitby Abbey.
I don't.
Oh, well, basically, it's the inspiration for, like, Dracula's castle in the novel.
Really? I did
Yeah.
not know that.
Yeah, it's like 30 minutes from me.
Really? You'll
So
have to
it'll
se you'll
obviously
have to of course, I'd like to go to the actual town where, Vlad the Impaler, which is another inspiration for Dracula, in Romania. I'd love to do that.
my, this'll explain a lot. So I get married next month on the 11th. So
Oh,
my partner's
congratulations.
Thank you. So my partner's just been on a hen do, as we call them, and that's where she went. Yeah,
That's so fun.
yeah. That's Whitby Abbey.
Oh, that is so cool. I love those old windows. That's
Mm,
beautiful. Yeah, that's beautiful.
yeah.
I
They set a
love
world
that.
record there once for the most amount of people dressed as vampires. They had over 1,500 people dressed as vampires. So it
Oh,
was literally a world
that
record.
sounds like something I would do.
Yeah, it was really, really random.
Love
Yeah.
that.
So you've mentioned that you went to Paris there, and you mentioned catacombs, obviously twice about the ones in
Yeah.
London, but you need to tell me about the Paris catacombs.
So I did do the Paris catacombs. It's been a bucket list of mine for a long time. I've done some
Mhm.
catacombs in other countries and I did one in Rome and I wanted to do obviously the Paris catacombs. So I went and I didn't want to investigate because they didn't say you couldn't, but I just felt like it would be kind of disrespectful.
Mm,
So the thing about the catacombs is they only let a certain amount of people down at a time. So you're not going to be in a really super crowded situation, which was so nice.
mm,
Unfortunately, you can't get tickets super far in advance. You have to be on your phone like a few days before, and you just had to get those tickets as soon as they're available. But and it was a little nerve wracking because I really wanted to do this, and I bought a plane ticket so that I could do it. So that was a little scary, but no problem getting the ticket. Got in. You go down, and it is a pretty decent walk that you got to go down so you can get to the level of the catacombs. They only have a small area open. So some people would say to me, "Oh, I'm so afraid of getting lost." You don't have to worry about getting lost because it's not just like you wander aimlessly. It's a kind of a controlled area where they have lights and things set up so that you can actually see your way through. And there are some people that work there down there just, to make sure nobody's touching the skeletons or anything like that. So you're not
mm,
going to get lost. But you're walking through, there's not a lot of people. I think they only let maybe 20 people down at a time, So, and there's no time period on how long you can stay. So you kind of, if you want to wait a little longer down there, you can, which what I did. And you can walk around, you can take as many pictures and videos, you just can't touch anything. And, when I was down there, it felt very heavy, is the best way I can describe it.
mm,
I'm one of those people that when I first started investigating, I didn't really know what that meant. But now the more and more I investigate, I'm in haunted locations all the time, I can kind of feel the energy in a place. And if something is super haunted, you might feel that energy around you. And the best way I can describe it is heavy. And I felt down there, it's absolutely haunted, 100%.
mm,
And in certain areas, you'll be standing just looking around and you'll feel like, the hairs on your arms stand up. You'll feel just a lot of that kind of interesting energy. And, I walked through, you get to walk around the back. There's certain sections and there's different areas that are highlighted so you can kind of get a little history on them. And what was interesting was that right around the time where we were there was a little information section on the audio app. They give you like a little audio thing to listen to. And now there was an area of the catacombs that during the 1700s and maybe early 1800s, they used to bring royalty down there. And you can actually have dinner in the catacombs, and they would have certain classical musicians down there to play music. And it was very haunting because the acoustics down there are very interesting. You can speak and it'll carry. And so we were
mm,
saying, "Oh, that's so neat. That's so neat that they did that." And there was something at the end saying that they were going to be having their first concert in, basically since those times. And it turned out that the concert that they were about to have down there, which was a private concert, it wasn't open to the public, but
mm.
it was this band called the Queens of the Stone Age. Are you familiar with them? Have you ever
Yeah.
heard of them? I've seen them a couple times in concert. They're an amazing band. But what they did was they weren't allowed to bring drums down there because if you're playing the drums regularly, I guess it would rattle the bones.
Yeah, yeah.
So they had to play these songs with a symphonic orchestra. So they had an
Mm,
orchestra backing and, Josh Hammond and I think maybe there might have been another guitar player and a bass player, but they did a whole recording of this and it's available now if you want to see the Catacombs concert. But it was the first one that they've done in hundreds of years. So it's pretty neat. I definitely would say for me, that was a bucket list location, and I cannot recommend it enough to anybody. Just, it is absolutely unlike anything you'll ever see in your life. And I've been in other catacombs, I've been in other ossuaries, is what the proper name is to call them. And
mm,
I've never seen one quite like that. I know there are some around the world. There's one in Portugal. I think there's one in Germany that are, maybe just as full of bones, but the magnitude of bones down there is absolutely staggering. From floor to ceiling, you're going to see femur bones stacked up. Then you're going to see the skulls arranged in different patterns, and some of them are arranged like hearts, and some of them are arranged in like a crucifix. And then you're going to see rib bones. But I'm saying the length of the tunnel,
yeah.
tunnel after tunnel after tunnel. It's just you know what it is because in your mind's eye, I know what it's gonna look like. I know when I get there, I know what to expect. But
Mhm,
the magnitude hits you when you're down there of exactly what you're looking at, and it is just, it's an indescribable feeling that I would absolutely recommend if you're able to do it. And what was cool too, I went during the summer. I went actually right before the Olympics, which I got in. I kind of was like right before all of the madness, and then I scooted back to England. But this was by far when it's very hot on the surface, it's still very cool down there, and it's just because it's so below the surface that it stays like a solid, nice temperature down there.
It's definitely something I want to do one day because it fascinates me, and like just the way that everything is arranged down there fascinates me, to be honest. Because I just think it's crazy.
Yeah.
But I didn't know there was. I mean, I knew there was others obviously around the world, but I didn't know there was obviously so many. So that's something I'm gonna have to look
Yeah.
into more.
I
Because
think the
me and my
other
old co-host Billy, we did an episode all about the Paris catacombs, and that well, it was one of my favorite ones we've done. To be fair,
I think the largest one might be the one in Rome, and that's the one that's scary because you can actually get lost in that one. And people recently, as far back as within the last 10 years, there was a story of some boys, like young boys, maybe sneaking in, like they found a way in and they got lost. And it was really serious because the authorities had a really hard time finding them. And they
mm,
did find them eventually, but they were worried because, they didn't have any food or water and there was no light. They were just kind of crawling around in the dark. I mean, I can't imagine how horrific that experience must have been.
no,
Then
no, hell
there's
no.
yeah, I mean, boys I guess will be boys, but it just, that's nuts. But yeah, there's some around. I want to say there is one in Germany that's really it's not super big, but it's very prolific in the design. So the
Mm,
ossuaries, they have the way that they design all of the bones and the placement. And the one in Portugal also is absolutely incredible as far as the artistic elements of what they designed with the bones. So I never thought I would be sitting here telling you that I'm going around the world, to find all these spooky places, but it's interesting. And you know what? There's maybe not as many people doing that as going to like the Eiffel Tower, Cool, I went to the Eiffel Tower, I climbed all the way up and there was, hundreds of people that were like corralled into the hallways with me. Like, what is that experience? Like
yeah,
I want to do the things that are off the beaten path that not every tourist in the world is coming there to do
yeah, exactly.
and it's memorable. So, dark tourism, you should do it.
Definitely, definitely. Right then, Gina. Well, I've really enjoyed this. Really enjoyed speaking to you. It's been really interesting.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a lot of fun chatting about paranormal and spooky stuff. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Like I said, I learned about cemetery enthusiasts, so that's something I'm going to have to look into. Oh, there we go. Last question that I always like to ask people who do investigations and stuff. Has there ever been a place that you've been to where you've like really properly scared?
You know, I would say the hospital I was talking about earlier, the
Hmm.
Penhurst State School, being in the basement. I wasn't alone, I was with my friend, but that was probably the closest to I could say I've ever been as far as being really, really scared. Because you're down there, there's no one around, there's no lights, you just have your flashlights, and it was very creepy. So I would have to go with that. Penhurst State
Hmm.
School basement,
Yeah. Well,
Candyland.
it makes sense. It makes sense. Right, but before we finish, do you want to let our listeners know where they can find you and all your stuff that you're up to?
Absolutely. So you can check me out on Instagram at shehans. I also have shehans.com if you want to see links to any of my happenings. I host events in South Florida with my paranormal team that you guys can join an investigation if you're close by or if you're on vacation. Also, I wrote my book that I told you guys about. It's available on Amazon. I have a link to that. And I also post links to I'll be posting this podcast on there and anything else that I'm up to. So shehunts.com is probably the best way to get me.
Cool. Cool. Right then, guys, thank you for listening. As always, go and follow our Instagram page at the Spooky Shed Podcast. The link in the bio there for all the other socials that we don't use. But Patreon page is there, YouTube channel, merch store, all that stuff. So thank you for listening, and we shall speak to you next time.